In a royal event meant to symbolize unity, Queen Letizia of Spain just did the unthinkable. With press cameras rolling and dignitaries watching, she refused her assigned seat next to Queen Camilla and demanded to be placed beside Catherine, Princess of Wales. The palace froze. The tension was instant. But what pushed Letizia to make such a public stand? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It was supposed to be a moment of regal harmony and image of solidarity between Europe's most prominent royal families. The summit was designed down to the last detail. Seating plans meticulously crafted, protocol rehearsed, press invited in carefully controlled numbers. But no one could have anticipated what Queen Letizia would do just minutes before the event formally began. As an aide guided her toward her seat beside Queen Camilla, Letizia paused, leaned in and uttered a phrase that would ignite an international spectacle. "This seat isn't suitable. I'd like to be moved." Confused, the staffer stammered, unsure if he had heard correctly. But Letizia's expression did not waver. Her eyes shifted to where Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat several chairs away. Then came the request that shattered the illusion of unity. Letizia asked to be moved beside Catherine and away from Camilla. A stunned silence swept through the immediate circle. Palace aides froze. Cameras captured the tension, though no words were audible. Foreign royals exchanged glances. Gasps could be seen, if not heard. And within seconds, the serene atmosphere cracked wide open. The move was subtle in execution but explosive in symbolism. A queen refusing to sit beside another queen? In royal terms, it was a declaration. Seating hierarchies are more than just ceremony, they're a public display of political alliances and personal respect. Letizia's act was no accident. It was a message. Chaos erupted backstage. Staff whispered into headsets. Protocol officers scurried with revised arrangements, and members of both royal households tried to contain the damage. But the cameras had already caught enough. Footage began circulating within the hour, clipped, captioned, and dissected by every major outlet. The speculation was instant. Was it a personal snub? A calculated power play? Had something been said? Done? Or was it about someone else entirely, perhaps Catherine? And then there was Camilla. Reports say her expression barely shifted, but those close enough claimed there was a flash of surprise, or perhaps something darker. She did not protest. She did not engage. She simply sat where she was placed, even as Queen Letizia moved gracefully, but defiantly to the other side of the room. And when she sat beside Catherine, the gesture was clear. This was not a misstep. This was alignment. But this wasn't a moment of impulse, it was the explosion of a quiet storm that had been brewing for months behind palace doors. Long before this public rupture, whispers of tension between Letizia and Camilla had already reached the corridors of both palaces. While the world smiled at their photo ops, insiders reveal the real story was one of competition, control, and quiet contempt. The friction didn't erupt overnight, it was a slow, silent war simmering beneath perfectly staged photographs and diplomatic smiles. At its core, Queen Letizia represented a new model of royalty, bold, reform-driven, and politically conscious. Her speeches cut through ceremonial fluff with a sharp edge, often championing causes that dared to challenge the status quo. And while many within the European elite found her refreshing, Camilla saw something else entirely. To her, Letizia wasn't modern, she was dangerous, too outspoken, too independent, too unwilling to play by the traditional rules of royal deference. According to one former courtier, Camilla once described Letizia in private as a politician in a tiara, and not in a complimentary tone. Over time, their differences calcified into quiet opposition. During official visits between the UK and Spain, interactions between the two queens were said to be cold at best. At one state dinner, sources claim they barely exchanged more than a few words. And during a joint engagement involving children's education, a subject close to both their hearts, Letizia's charity proposal, which aimed at launching a joint Anglo-Spanish literacy initiative, was quietly declined by Camilla's team without explanation. Letizia, known for her sharp instincts, understood exactly what that meant. It wasn't about the initiative, it was about her. Behind the scenes, Camilla's circle grew wary of Letizia's rising popularity. Her polished image, international respect, and modern appeal began to overshadow Camilla's carefully cultivated presence. At events, press coverage often skewed in Letizia's favor. Commentators praised her elegance, intellect, and the sense of strength she projected without appearing domineering. To Camilla, it was a slow erosion of the spotlight she had spent decades fighting to claim. And while Letizia never publicly expressed resentment, those close to her confirmed the tension was impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before every shared appearance became a chess match. Who would arrive first? Who would speak more? Who would be photographed beside Catherine? Every detail was dissected by royal observers, and while the world speculated lightly, those within the palaces knew the truth. There was no warmth between these women-only calculation. Mutual distrust became the undercurrent of every diplomatic exchange. And though Letizia continued to play the role of polished ally, it became increasingly clear she no longer respected the system Camilla had come to represent. Still, Letizia remained publicly diplomatic until a new alliance shifted the entire balance of power. Behind palace walls, where women are often pitted against each other, something remarkable was happening. Letizia and Catherine were forming a quiet, unshakable bond, one that would eventually reshape the royal landscape and threaten Camilla's place within it. It began far from the eyes of palace aides and protocol enforcers at a quiet side event during a United Nations Women's Summit. Both queens had been invited to speak, yet their interaction was unscheduled, spontaneous, and deeply impactful. Away from their respective titles and national expectations, Catherine and Letizia found something rare: recognition. Two women navigating kingdoms not built for them, both held to impossible standards, both underestimated by those who assumed they would play their roles quietly. In that private conversation, brief but potent, a foundation was laid. Not of strategy, but of shared understanding. Over the following months, signs of their growing alliance became impossible to ignore to those paying close attention. Their conversations at royal events, though always discreet, carried an ease and warmth absent from their other interactions. They began sharing thoughts on education reform, maternal mental health, and how a modern monarchy could exist without clinging to outdated ideas. Both women had endured institutional silencing, Catherine through years of tabloid attacks, Letizia through criticism for being too outspoken, too assertive, too different. In each other, they found not only empathy but strength. Letizia, in private interviews with trusted Spanish media figures, referred to Catherine as genuine, intelligent, and unafraid to evolve. She never named her directly, but the compliments were clear. Those close to Catherine confirmed the feeling was mutual. Letizia wasn't just another royal, she was someone Catherine trusted. Someone she could speak with beyond the rehearsed lines of diplomacy. In a world that demanded compliance, their bond became its own form of resistance. They began exchanging handwritten notes, passed through aides, or slipped discreetly into handbags during shared events. One aide reportedly found a folded message with a single sentence from Catherine: "You're not alone." That note was never spoken of, but Letizia's demeanor at the following engagement had shifted. She stood taller, smiled wider, but not at Camilla. It is said that Catherine warned Letizia, carefully but deliberately, about the influence of Camilla's inner circle. A quiet heads-up cloaked in gentle words, but one that changed Letizia's perception forever. From that point on, Letizia was not just wary, she was watchful. And when she refused to sit beside Camilla at the summit, the act wasn't born from pettiness. It was solidarity. A public stand cloaked in diplomacy. A line drawn in silk and lace, but a line nonetheless. Letizia's choice wasn't made in isolation. It was a deliberate echo of the whispered truths Catherine had once shared with her. An act that carried decades of silenced voices behind it. In that one gesture, she didn't just stand beside Catherine, she stood with every woman who had been told to smile through betrayal. Every queen forced to pretend comfort beside a rival. Every royal expected to endure in silence. But this growing bond wasn't just personal, it was about reclaiming a different kind of royal power, one Camilla had fought decades to secure. Behind every royal decision is a team pulling strings, and Camilla's network runs deep. Letizia didn't just snub a queen consort, she challenged a system of power and influence that's been tightly controlled for years. At the center of the storm lies not just a woman, but a machine carefully engineered, strategically placed, and ruthlessly protected. Camilla's ascension to queen consort was never just about love or legacy, it was about power. And behind her smile stood a network known in whispers as the Quiet Court. These weren't flashy publicists or outspoken strategists. They were longtime palace confidantes, legacy aides, and media intermediaries skilled in the art of subtle domination. Their job wasn't to promote, they were there to protect, control, and, when necessary, erase. Their reach extended far beyond Buckingham's walls. They had eyes in every room, ears on every conversation, and a reputation for making inconvenient narratives disappear before they reached headlines. Foreign royals learned quickly what was expected. Behind closed doors, palace staff reportedly reminded visiting dignitaries to honor the queen consort's presence, a subtle but firm instruction not to outshine, not to challenge, and above all not to question. Queen Letizia, fiercely independent and no stranger to politics, initially played along. But with each joint appearance, the cracks began to show. Her prepared speeches were allegedly revised without her consent. Her more passionate remarks, those championing equality and modern monarchy, were trimmed, softened, or omitted entirely from official transcripts. And the justification? To preserve diplomatic balance, though many suspected the real reason had a name: Camilla. The pattern wasn't limited to Letizia. Catherine, too, had once faced this invisible blockade. One of her early initiatives, a groundbreaking mental health collaboration across European royal households, was mysteriously delayed after it was discovered to conflict with Camilla's domestic campaign timeline. Behind the scenes, Catherine had raised concerns. She was told it was simply a scheduling issue. But it wasn't. It was Camilla's court tightening the leash. Influence disguised as protocol, control masked as coordination. And the most impenetrable shield in all of this? King Charles. His unwavering defense of Camilla created an invisible force field around her. Any criticism was seen as disloyalty. Any deviation from protocol, an insult to the throne itself. Camilla's influence, though rarely acknowledged, became sacrosanct. To question it was to risk being cut off, shut out, or quietly replaced. But Letizia didn't play by those rules. She saw the structure for what it was: a fragile monarchy, held together not by unity, but by manipulation. And she made the choice few dared to make. She pushed back. When Letizia refused her seat next to Camilla, it wasn't about the chair, it was about dismantling the illusion. It was a calculated strike against the network that had long controlled the narrative. A public rejection of an institution that thrived in the shadows. In that one defiant moment, she tore the veil away from the quiet court and forced the world to look beneath the crown. And yet, amid all the political games, it was one private conversation that tipped the scales and sparked Letizia's unprecedented defiance. Just days before the event, Catherine and Letizia met for tea at a discreet countryside estate. No press, no staff. What was said during those hours remains mostly secret, but one phrase has since leaked: "They'll come for you next." It wasn't a formal meeting. No advisors, no scheduled itinerary. Just two women, two queens in a private setting far removed from the velvet cages they were expected to thrive in. The location itself was symbolic. A place untouched by the formality of royal corridors, where truth could exist without scrutiny. What began as a warm, overdue reunion slowly unraveled into something far more urgent. Catherine had requested the meeting not to gossip, not to plot, but to warn. The pressure she had endured for years at the hands of institutional power wasn't something she could let another woman walk into unprepared. And as Letizia listened, a silence fell between them that said more than words ever could. Catherine, often underestimated for her poise and restraint, opened up about the toll how initiatives she had led were mysteriously stalled, how advisors once loyal to her shifted allegiance without explanation, and how every effort to modernize the monarchy met an invisible wall of resistance. She didn't say Camilla's name outright, but the implication hung heavy. There were things Catherine had seen, things buried under layers of reputation management and tradition. Letizia didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what Catherine was describing, because she, too, had started to feel the squeeze. It was during this conversation that Catherine is said to have shared an incident that had been quietly erased from public knowledge. An internal dispute, buried under press silence, involving a women's leadership program. Catherine had championed one that was dismantled days before its launch, after conflicting interests from Camilla's office emerged. No explanation. No recovery. Just silence. That revelation shifted something in Letizia. It was no longer a matter of preference or politics, it was about protection, control, and survival. As the hours passed, the tone of the conversation changed. What began as a reflection became a preparation. Letizia asked direct questions. Catherine answered them plainly. And then came the line that echoed across the entire summit. Long after the tea had gone cold, they'll come for you next. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise born of experience. Letizia left that estate not rattled, but awakened. She understood now that aligning herself too closely with Camilla or staying silent in the face of calculated erasure would only ensure her own voice would be next to vanish. By the time she stepped onto the grounds of the summit, her decision was already made. The refusal to sit beside Camilla wasn't a spur-of-the-moment defiance, it was the first act of a woman who had been warned, who had listened, and who had chosen to act. A line had been drawn, not in defiance of the institution, but in defense of something greater: truth, integrity, and the quiet promise made between two queens far away from cameras and crowns. But Letizia's move wasn't just emotional, it set off a chain reaction that forced Buckingham Palace into crisis mode. The cameras caught the surface, but behind palace walls, chaos erupted. Staff screamed through earpieces, aides scrambled to revise seating charts, and high-ranking courtiers feared a diplomatic collapse. Letizia's refusal wasn't just a royal insult, it was a geopolitical nightmare. Within minutes of the incident, panic coursed through every hallway of Buckingham Palace. From the moment Letizia changed her seat, senior aides raced to contain what they knew would be interpreted as an international scandal. Diplomatic channels between the UK and Spain lit up, first with confusion, then concern, and finally, quiet fury. This was no small protocol breach. It was a monarch-to-monarch gesture that bypassed the usual layers of formality and stabbed directly at the heart of royal diplomacy. Spanish representatives, initially stunned, began signaling firm support for Letizia's decision, framing it as a sovereign expression of personal autonomy. Behind those polished words, the meaning was clear: they weren't backing down. Inside the palace, King Charles was said to be livid. Courtiers reported him pacing furiously, calling the act reckless provocation and a deeply humiliating moment for the crown. His tone wasn't just angry, it was shaken. In his mind, it was a breach of loyalty not just from a foreign royal, but from within his own family. The optics were devastating. The queen consort being publicly snubbed, his son's wife Catherine visibly favored, and no explanation that would hold up under the weight of global speculation. Charles demanded intervention. But when he turned to William, what he got was silence. William, for perhaps the first time in his role as future king, refused to mediate. He did not rush to defend the crown or restore order. Instead, he stood behind Catherine quietly, unshakably. That refusal, small on the surface, sent a larger message to everyone watching. There would be no walk back, no public appeasement. The future king was choosing integrity over optics, and the monarchy for once would have to sit with its consequences. Camilla's team, usually quick to release statements or quietly redirect the press, went completely silent. No quotes, no spin, no clarification. The silence was deafening and dangerous. Without a narrative from within, the story was quickly taken over from the outside. Royal aides tried to pivot, contacting media outlets with a version that painted the move as a harmless reassignment due to personal preferences. But no one was buying it. Not when the footage so clearly showed the deliberate nature of Letizia's choice. The intensity, the optics, the timing. It was no accident. The damage control attempts only made things worse. With Camilla's team retreating into silence, the press turned to Spanish sources, and what they found only deepened the divide. Letizia was receiving quiet praise from her country's media for standing in solidarity with Catherine. The message was taking hold. She had drawn a line against the palace's inner politics, and in doing so, had struck a blow for transparency, dignity, and strength. But as the palace spun in panic, the world outside erupted. Social media lit up, and a new narrative began to take hold. Within minutes, Hashtag Letizia was right began trending. Public support for the Spanish queen soared. Editorials praised her courage. And suddenly, it wasn't just a seating snub, it was a stand against everything the monarchy refused to admit. The footage of Letizia's quiet defiance exploded across platforms like wildfire. Clipped, captioned, and remixed. The moment became more than news, it became a movement. Audiences who had once passively watched royal protocol now dissected it like a battlefield. On TikTok, young voices proclaimed it the royal reset. On X and Instagram, users drew comparisons between Letizia and Catherine, two women rising above the suffocating grip of outdated monarchy politics. And across newsrooms in Madrid, London, Paris, and beyond, headlines no longer questioned if something had happened, they questioned what it meant. Journalists began labeling the moment as a feminist royal revolution, calling it a modern turning point for European royalty. For decades, royal women were expected to be compliant figureheads, elegant but voiceless. But Letizia had changed that in one calculated move. Not through a fiery speech, not through a rebellion, but through dignity, intention, and strategic silence. She had turned a chair into a podium, and the world had heard her message loud and clear. Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic pointed to the act as a symbolic rejection of hierarchy, a rejection of the old world rules that protected power at the expense of truth. Camilla, once propped up as the embodiment of royal resilience, suddenly found her image crumbling under the pressure. Her approval ratings began slipping, particularly among younger generations. Across Europe, polls reflected a sharp drop in public favor toward her, while Letizia and Catherine surged in relatability and support. The digital sphere became a mirror of that shift. Memes flooded the timeline. One labeled Letizia as the Queen of Queens. Another showed an empty seat with the caption reserved for honesty. Opinion pieces unpacked the deeper meaning behind the snub, an entire media ecosystem now orbiting around a moment no one inside the palace had prepared for. Even cultural critics joined the chorus, calling the shift a reckoning not just for the monarchy but for the system that allowed its women to be weaponized against each other for decades. Still, not everyone was applauding. Traditional royalists accused Letizia of disrespect. Some insisted the move was calculated to embarrass the British crown. But those voices were quickly drowned out by the tidal wave of support. What mattered most was no longer the question of etiquette, it was the question of integrity. And in the eyes of the people, Letizia had chosen integrity over obedience, sisterhood over silence. The damage to Camilla's image wasn't superficial, it was structural. Her silence in the aftermath only deepened the perception that she had no answer, no defense. And Catherine, without ever uttering a word publicly, became the quiet pillar around whom this entire narrative swirled. Her name was now spoken with reverence, not sympathy. She had endured, and through Letizia's act of allegiance, she had been vindicated. Yet amidst the storm of headlines and hashtags, the real question remains, what does this mean for the future of the crown? Catherine never released a statement. She didn't post. She didn't comment. And yet, without a single word, she emerged as the quiet victor. Because while Camilla clung to tradition, Catherine let the world crown her in silence. In the wake of Letizia's headline-shattering move, the press waited for a response from Catherine. But there was none. No official comment from her office. No social media acknowledgement. No leaked sentiment. Instead, she did something far more calculated. She let the silence speak, and it did louder than any headline ever could. While courtiers scrambled, pundits speculated, and Camilla's team slipped further into retreat, Catherine stood still, dignified, untouched. Her composure became the narrative. The woman who had once been picked apart by tabloids and underestimated by palace traditionalists was now being revered not for what she said, but for what she didn't need to say. And then came the photograph. Days after the summit, Letizia and Catherine were seen together shoulder to shoulder, smiling with ease at a small private engagement. It was no accident. No coincidence. The image was carefully captured and quietly released. And in that frame, everything shifted. It was a visual alliance, a royal solidarity, a clear message. The future of monarchy would not be forged by silence in the service of tradition, but by those who stood for transparency, grace, and strength. While Letizia had made the first move, Catherine's calm affirmation sealed the moment in history. Behind palace doors, the fallout was immediate. Camilla's team began to scale back her visibility. Scheduled engagements were postponed. Interviews that had been arranged were suddenly canceled. Even within the firm, insiders began whispering of a cooling period, a soft retreat designed to limit further damage. But it was too late. The silence had turned into exposure. Camilla's decades-long battle to claim a place of unchallenged influence now stood fractured by one moment, and one woman's refusal to play the game. Reports of tension between King Charles and Camilla began to surface. Though the palace denied any rift, sources close to the royal household confirmed that the fallout had bled into their private life. Charles, known for his fierce defense of Camilla, now found himself caught between loyalty and legacy. Protecting her meant shielding the very structure the public was turning against. And with Catherine rising in public esteem, the balance of the monarchy was shifting subtly but undeniably. As for William, he made his position clear not through speeches, but through actions. His appearances alongside Catherine were deliberate. His tone toward the press, firm. His distancing from internal royal drama, absolute. He stood with her not as a formality, but as a statement. The public took notice. Analysts no longer described him as an heir, waiting in the wings. They called him a man preparing to lead, alongside a woman the world already viewed as its moral compass. And so a new narrative was born. Not from the palace press office, but from the people. Catherine was no longer simply the Princess of Wales. She was becoming something far more powerful, the monarchy's modern matriarch. A woman shaped by adversity, propelled by principle, and strengthened by silence. But this story isn't over, not by a long shot. Because what happened at that summit didn't just rattle the monarchy, it rewrote its future. When Queen Letizia refused her seat, she wasn't just rejecting Camilla, she was rejecting the system Camilla represented. In that single moment, the stage was set for a royal reckoning, one that may elevate Catherine, or destroy the institution entirely. What followed wasn't merely backlash or viral media, it was seismic political recalibration. Behind palace walls, insiders began to whisper what could no longer be ignored. The old alliances were crumbling. Longtime royal loyalists, once unshakably aligned with Camilla's faction, were now quietly re-evaluating their positions. Diplomats, strategists, even senior aides had begun referring to Catherine and Letizia not as outliers but as the faces of a new era. Royal insiders admitted what the public already sensed. A shift in global alliances was not coming, it had arrived. Letizia's act had been the trigger, but the powder keg had been building for years. And in the quiet corridors of Europe's oldest monarchies, one truth echoed louder than ever before: Camilla's grip was no longer absolute. Catherine and Letizia were now seen not just as women of grace but as leaders of integrity. In them, people saw a monarchy that could evolve. One rooted in humanity, not hierarchy. In Letizia, they saw conviction. In Catherine, composure. Their partnership, once dismissed as ceremonial, had become a force, reshaping not only the public's perception of royalty, but its future. For years, Camilla had represented the triumph of survival within the firm. But survival, as it turned out, was no longer enough. With the world watching, and a younger generation demanding authenticity, the monarchy was being forced to choose between protecting the institution's past or securing its future. Reports emerged that Camilla's role was being re-evaluated within the palace. Nothing official, no announcements. But key appearances were scaled down. Committees once under her oversight were quietly redirected. Her proximity to critical royal strategy appeared reduced. Even those closest to Charles were no longer certain of her place in the long-term narrative. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, younger royals once mentored by Camilla were now gravitating toward Catherine. Her calm defiance, her unshakable presence, had made her the de facto North Star for those seeking a path forward without the political entanglements of the past. Analysts began dissecting the long-term implications. Many predicted a permanent weakening of Camilla's legacy, not because of scandal, but because of silence. Letizia's refusal to sit beside her had not exposed a lie, it had exposed an imbalance. And once revealed, that imbalance could not be ignored. Camilla had built her power in the shadows, but Catherine and Letizia were building theirs in the light. And history, especially royal history, is often rewritten by those who step into the spotlight at exactly the right time. The monarchy now stood at a crossroads. One path led backward to whispered obedience and rigid tradition. The other, forward to transparency, truth, and transformation. Neither choice would come without sacrifice. But the days of silent compliance were over. The world had changed, and so too must the crown or risk being swallowed by its own refusal to adapt. And in the middle of it all, two women now carry the hopes and the wrath of a kingdom, on the edge of transformation. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.